Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining. My name is Berit and today we're gonna have a little wrap up of what I've been reading since about the middle of March when I filmed my last wrap up, which was also my very first wrap up ever. So since then I have been reading 7 books, not all at the same time, but I've read 7 books, which honestly is way more than I thought. And the first 3 books that I've read were part of the Tales of the Otori series by Gillian Rubinstein, published under the name of Leon Hearn. This is a very light, very light fantasy YA novel set in a world that resembles feudal Japan. And it is pretty much a samurai-ish, assassin-ish kind of adventure novel that follows 2 main characters, Takeo and Kaede. It also has a love story between those characters that is pretty central to the plot. I won't go much into detail here because I have made individual videos about each of the 3 books, which you are very welcome to watch if you haven't, or you could also read the novels if you haven't. It was a fun time. I think I had read the series when I was a teenager and I revisited it now, so that was very cool. I think I would give the series as a whole a 3 out of 5 probably, because there were some things that I didn't really love about the plot and about the characters and about everything, but it was still enjoyable to read, and especially the first novel. I will say that I think the first novel is the best one. It's the most emotional one, and it's definitely the one that I have read most often as a teenager. But yeah, it was a good series, very light fantasy. Yeah. Okay, after that I finished reading Dune Messiah. That is the second part of the Dune series, so everything that I'll say about this book has probably minor spoilers for Dune, just so that you're aware of that. Dune Messiah, it takes place 12 years after Dune has finished. Paul is now the emperor and the ruler of Dune, and his jihad has been going on for some years off screen between the books, so to say. And this book is way shorter than the first one, and the main focus of this is how Paul has developed as a ruler, and it also takes up the issue that not everybody is very happy with Paul as a ruler, and people are plotting to overthrow him, or some people are plotting to overthrow him. And that is one of the main things in the book, that people from different groups are plotting to overthrow Paul. Paul is also constantly reflecting his position and what his ruling has done to the people and how it has changed Dune. The aspect of terraforming is also a bit stronger here, which was very cool. And we also get to know Paul's sister Alia very much, because now she's a teenager. At the end of the first novel she was 2 or 3 years old. I think now she's like 15. And that was very interesting. I think I gave this a 4 out of 5. I would say 4.5 out of 5, because it left me with some question marks, but Dune 1 did too, because sometimes, since Paul has this vision that he can be like many places at once, he kind of goes beyond questions of time in a way, so he's like past, future, present, everything is one, and that sometimes confuses me. It did also do that here, but the plot is very interesting. You also get to meet new kinds of creatures, new kinds of people, which was super cool. You have a face dancer, for example. I think the title itself is super cool, and this face dancer basically can shapeshift. And he's also a relatively interesting character. You also meet a Gola, which is kind of resembles a golem and a zombie, and I don't know, several of those things. And he was also super interesting. And yeah, enjoyed reading this very much. But I think you can read the first Dune novel probably just by itself and say, okay, that was a good time and I'm finished with that now. I don't think you can do that with the second one, because it feels very much like the second one takes up plot lines that need to be continued after the ending of book 2. So we'll see where the plot goes, but I think it's a very good continuation of the Dune series. I liked it a lot. After that, I read 1984 by George Orwell. Chances are you have heard about this book or you have read this book. My knowledge going into this was that the Big Brother thing comes from here, and that this is a dystopian classic, and that's about all I knew. So this book is about a character named Winston Smith, I think, and it's about his life in the totalitarian state of Oceania, if that's how you pronounce it. And for most of the book, you really get to know how life works in this state, how the state monitors its people, how the institutions work, how the thought police works, and basically how indoctrinated and brainwashed everybody is. And Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, I think, and his job there is that he falsifies, or let's say corrects, different texts like journal articles, because every time the government changes something in their worldview or has a new enemy that they go to war with, or just basically if they just change any viewpoint, they have people in the Ministry of Truth whose job it is to make sure that everything that's recorded, every old journal article, basically just every document, needs to be changed so that it looks like this has always been the case, so that the government always seems flawless and never makes anything wrong, and that is Winston's job. And the thoughts that are taken up in this book, especially in the first 2/3 where the plot is pretty quiet and it's not very page-turner-like, the thoughts that are taken up are super interesting. The book reflects on whether concepts like truth and past and future even exist, because they are so fragile in this world, where they can just go and change everything so that you couldn't even prove that things had been different at some point in time. Anyway, that was very interesting. And then towards the third part of the book, because this book has 3 parts, the third part escalates pretty heavily, which I hadn't expected it in a way, although it was foreseeable, but I think I didn't expect this much as like escalation. I will say that this was not a fun time. Like, I think I gave this book I think I gave it a 4 out of 5, but I'm not sure if I can say that I enjoyed reading it, mostly because of the third part. There were things where I was like, "Eesh, I don't really want to read that," but okay. It was shocking in many ways. It also resembled much of like the fake news debates things from the past years in many scary ways. So now I also understand why this book is considered to be so relevant also today. This was a very good book. I'm happy that I read it, because now I know it. And it had also been a while since I read a dystopian novel, so it was interesting and very thought-provoking, and this is potentially a book that kind of sticks with you for a while. After 1984, I needed something wholesome, so I read Howl's Moving Castle. Chances are you know the plot because you know the movie. However, the book is pretty different from the movie actually. So this is also about Sophie Hatter, who lives in the kingdom of Ingari. Yes, Ingari. She is the eldest of 3 daughters. She is a hat maker and she is cursed in the beginning by the Witch of the Waste, and this curse turns her into an old woman. But the twist is that she, of course, doesn't know how to break the curse, and also she cannot tell anybody that she's cursed. And then she runs away from home and finds refuge in Howl's Moving Castle. However, Howl is said to be heartless, and he is also said to steal the hearts of young women. So he's pretty much a bad guy. And in the book we get to know much about life in Howl's Moving Castle. Sophie gets to know the fire demon Calcifer, who kind of runs the castle, and also Howl's assistant Michael, who plays a much bigger role in the book than he does in the movie. And also the whole thing where the door of the castle opens up to different worlds is kind of different in the book, because the worlds that the door opens up to are very different. And Howl himself is also a bit different in the book. He is very much of a drama queen, which is super hilarious, and the whole book is very funny in many places, and it doesn't have so much of a war connotation as the movie does. So yeah, the plot is kind of different. There are different things that happen. The overall story arc is the same though. But even if you know the movie, I would recommend to read the book, because this is a very cozy, easy read. I absolutely liked reading this. It's very, very wholesome, very cozy. It's a good antidote to when you've read something as bleak as 1984. So that was cool. I think I don't know what I gave it on Goodreads. Maybe I didn't rate it because I'm not sure what to give it. It was fun. And the last book that I have read in April was The Other City by Michal Aivas. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. This is a Czech book, and I read this for my World Literary Tour, which for April had Praha as the city. And this is a book, I had done some research on what I wanted to read for Praha, because I wanted to read something Czech from Praha or about Praha. And this is a magical realism kind of book. I haven't read much magical realism. And in this book we have a protagonist who is also the first person narrator, and he stumbles upon a book with very strange letters in the beginning, and he buys this book, and the letters are like not from our world. No language that we know of uses these letters, which is confusing for the protagonist, and he buys this book, and then he tries to find out more about the book and about this kind of language that he cannot really read. And he finds out that the book comes from another world, from The Other City, which is the title of the book. That's just the Norwegian title. As he tries to find out more about this city, he gets sucked deeper into this other world, and it turns out that this is also kind of a dangerous world, because not everybody in this other city is happy about this new intruder. And that's basically the plot of the story. Having said that, this is one of the most absurd books I've ever read, I think, or one of the most confusing, because this is a very surreal book. It is about as logical as a dream, which means that it's not logical at all, and but at the same time it is beautifully written, and the pictures, like the mental images that the book evokes at some places are incredibly beautiful, at the same time that they are very confusing and very absurd. There is, for example, one beautiful situation where the protagonist rides slash flies on the back of a skate, like those animals that live in the sea, and the skate flies up through the clouds and then like above the clouds into the sunrise, which was super absurd to imagine, but it was also written so beautifully that it was just fascinating. But yeah, the book is full of absurdities. You have, for example, one episode where the protagonist joins a lecture in this other city that overlaps with Praha. Like, it's the same city, but it's also not the same because it's a different world. But he is, however, in a lecture at night, because pretty much all of the things in the other city take place at night. He is at a lecture where he sneaks in, and then at some point all the listeners, they take out like a small wooden box, I think, and they have ermines in the box. Like, everybody has one box with one ermine. And then they notice that the protagonist doesn't have that, because why would he? Like, and then he flees from the lecture and runs through the building and out of the building, but the ermines chase him and they surround him, they circle him in the street. And they don't attack him, but every time he tries to get away, they bite him in the legs so that he basically cannot get away. And then after a while, a pair of ermines comes that drag a sled behind them, and on this sled there is a TV which broadcasts the lecturer. And I don't even remember if the lecturer says something to him, because then another pair of ermines comes along and they also drag a sled which with a TV on top, and that broadcasts something from like the high priest of this other city, and then the lecturer and the high priest get into a heated debate about something, and then the protagonist can just leave because nobody pays attention to him anymore. And I was reading it and I was like, okay, wait, did I get that right? Ermines chase him, and then ermines drag a TV, and then they have a heated debate, and what? So I think in this book you have to abandon the idea of finding logic and the idea of understanding everything, because that's at least what I did, and then the book worked very well for me. I'm not sure how I would rate it, because at points I was not sure whether I liked what I didn't understand or not, because I was just so confused. But then again, there were such beautiful images that were kind of composed in my head, and I wouldn't want to have missed that. So I would recommend to read this if you ever want to read a surrealist book. I also read that the author, Michal Aivas, is often compared to Borges, who is known for his magical realism. I also read that this book basically is part of almost like a subgenre that is not exactly magical realism, but actually magical Praha, because there are apparently several books and authors that write about and that take place in Praha in a like magical realism setting. And the fact that this book is so surrealist kind of makes sense when you learn that Praha was, after Paris, the biggest center of surrealism in the world, which I personally didn't know before. I found that out afterwards. But yeah, it was beautiful. I also absolutely love the cover of this, because you have like the shape of the city, like the skyline, and then behind that you have like a faded skyline of the other city. And then you have this tram, which is a tram that runs through Praha, that takes you to the other city. But nobody who goes on the tram is ever seen again in regular Praha, which is kind of scary, but also kind of interesting and very magical. And this book also takes up the question of fictional worlds and where the borders of our world lie, and how different worlds overlap and kind of have fragile borderlands where you can kind of look into the other world, maybe even step into the other world, and that then you can like see how one world infiltrates the other and how they kind of intertwine, which was super interesting to read, also like from a more philosophical almost standpoint. So not sure how to rate this, but that was super absurd but also very much fun. That was the last book that I read in April. In May, for my world tour, I will read a book that takes place in Istanbul, and I would love to read a Turkish book that takes place in Istanbul. Of course, not in Turkish, I don't speak Turkish. But if you have any recommendations for books that take place in this city, let me know. I will be very interested because I haven't decided yet what I want to read. And apart from that, I am at the moment reading Children of Dune, part 3 of Dune, which I'm so far enjoying, but I will talk more about that when I have read the book. And apart from that, we will see what May will bring in terms of books. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye!